And now we'll be moving on to our next speaker. And you've actually seen this person before. It will be Vinod Krishna, who will be sharing a personal talk this time about the mindsets of a chief storytelling officer, which we started discovering on the panel discussion, but we will go in depth here. So Vinod, please join me live once again. Lovely.
Hey, Artem.
Before we dive into this, let me just check. Everyone, please put a plus or an exclamation mark in the chat if you can hear and see Vinod all right, just to check the platform stability. All right. Perfect. So we're all yours. Let me know when to launch the slides, and I'm here for you.
Oh, yes, we can have the slides on. Yeah, thank you so much, Artem. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Folks who have joined from different parts of the world. Firstly, I'm very grateful to Artem and everyone here for this opportunity to be speaking to some amazing storytellers who are in different phases of their storytelling journey. So the topic that we are going to sort of focus on is about shaping the mindset of a chief story officer, of a CSO. We've been having various speakers talk about whether the role of a CSO is required, what a CSO can do, how a CSO should actually deliver within an organization, what is the scope of a CSO's role itself. So we've been talking of various experiences that are being shared on this particular platform. So I'm going to be delving into the role of a CSO and what is required of a CSO to succeed in that role, to really be able to build their performance, build the story capability in the organization, and how what is the approach that they need to take? How do they need to sort of look at the role of the CSO itself? And that's where we're looking at exploring what should be some of the key factors we look at, what should we consider when we need to sort of build the mindset of a CSO. I was working with an organization recently, and there was a quarterly business review where the CEO of the company organized an all-hands meeting. And as part of the all-hands meeting, it was a quick 30-minute meeting. So the communication was set up in such a way that the CEO would actually lead the conversation and drive the key messages. And then if there are some questions, would take a few minutes for questions. And that's what was planned. Now, once the CEO's address was done and the 30 minutes of that event of the all hands meeting happened, I interacted with a few of the people, different people in the organization. And the people who had assembled there to be part of the all hands, there were people who had joined 3 weeks ago, and there was somebody who was 14 years in the organization also. And the energy, you could feel the energy was very different in the room. And when I happened to just interact with a couple of them, and especially the one who had joined, a team member who had joined about 3 weeks prior, what I gathered, the immediate reaction was, I think the focus of this company is just numbers. It seems like I got the feeling they're not really bothered about the people. And when I asked, the individual to, help me understand a little more, he said, hey, in my team, a couple of senior people were let go recently, and there was a series of, layoffs happening across different teams, and they trimmed various teams. And in my team, I actually saw two senior people who actually trained me for the first 10 days, and the way they interacted with me, the way they groomed me in the first 10 days, and I'm new in this organization, I felt very comfortable and I started to settle down. And suddenly I get to hear that they're not going to be with the company anymore. And I was hoping the CEO is going to talk about that in the all hands meeting. And what I could gather from there, from that conversation over there, was when you look at organizations today, there is massive disruption in the industry. There is the people in organizations, various organizations that I interact with, and we are seeing that on in various forums, are primarily looking at how do we adapt to this change? What do we do? And everybody I see, I would say a lot of them are investing in certifications and how do we sort of adapt to this quickly. Maybe I build some new skills, and there are some who are still trying to take a decision of, what is it that I should do. What will my organization actually, what direction my organization will move in. And when you look at what is a leader's responsibility today, is to primarily provide clarity, direction, and alignment. And I see that people within the organization are constantly looking for getting some clarity of what is the next move the organization is going to make. What direction are we moving? And how do we align quickly to strategic changes happening in the organization? And there is a narrative of change all around, within organizations, outside of organizations. And I think that's what I noticed out there, that people within organizations are looking for that the leaders to actually provide them clarity and direction. I want to pause here and ask a question, actually. So here's a question. I've typed it in and put it up in the chat also. So what is a must-ask question in an employee survey? I would invite you to just share your responses on chat. All right. So a survey during onboarding. So this is a survey to understand, just like a pulse of the employees, pulse of the organization. So if you want to do an employee survey, you want to know how things are, what's happening with our people. So what's a must-ask question that I'm sure you're familiar with employee surveys that happen usually 6 months once, or an annual ritual that happens in many organizations. Right? Have you had a conversation about your perspectives in the last 6 months? Lovely. Should we also narrate the reason behind the survey so that it's different from the annual ritual? So this is think of it as an annual ritual where companies run these employee surveys. So it's all employees who actually answer a whole lot of questions. Do you recommend the company to others? Wonderful, Oksana. Okay, Michelle is saying, what's your personal approach to solving a specific task using what skills, perhaps? Okay. Achmi is saying, have you had a moment when your work was appreciated by your team or leader in the last 2 weeks? Beautiful. All right, psychological safety. Yeah, do you feel psychologically safe within the environment that you're working within, the team, in the organization? Wonderful. So when you look at what happens to surveys have a whole lot of questions about how the organization is performing. What's your view on the kind of leadership that you report to? What's your opinion about about the work environment. Are you comfortable with something? Do you have any problems? So most of the surveys have two things which I see. There is a rating scale on a 1 to 5 usually, and there are some which are open-ended questions to, to prompt people to input their thoughts. And most of the times, and what happens with these surveys is, once the surveys are submitted, there's a collation of all of these numbers, and they usually turn out to be some kind of a percentage or score. Now, if the score is above a particular point, let's say it's 4.5 out of 5, then on certain criteria you're 4.5, then you feel, yeah, we're good. And if, let's say, something is indicated as 3.5 or 3 or 2.5, then you say, oh, I think we need to pay attention to this, and sort of try to delve into that a little more. What I believe is, when we want to sort of understand what's happening within organizations, what's going on there, and take a pulse of the organization, surveys can help bring some quantification of what is going on inside. And what can help us understand the realities, the ground realities within the organization, is primarily the stories that are around. Most of the times, the surveys do not capture the stories. So there is this point of, yeah, is my workplace psychologically safe? So many times, we come across people playing it very safe. They don't want to even provide an honest rating. So that to play it safe, they hit a 3. I've seen people in organizations hit a 3 on a 1 to 5 scale to be neutral. Now, there are stories out there which are not really coming out of what really is going on in the minds of people, what really is happening in the workplaces, and plenty of stories where it could be about appreciation, it could be about functional conflict, it could be about how there are new ideas that somebody has, but is still new in the organization, so is not being heard. There are certain dominant narratives which are running through that organization, which sort of mask the talent within the organization. So when you look at trying to understand what the pulse of the people is in the organization, it's not enough to sort of look at just surveys there. Today, a lot of organizations continue to sort of use surveys as a method to get a dipstick or get a pulse or get an understanding of where they stand. Numbers are important, but I think the qualitative part is going to come from stories. Now, we need to understand, we're talking about this, a storytelling conference. We know the power of stories, of listening to an employee's story, listening to the story of a leader, and stories within organizations. I think those are true indicators of what the reality is. So I would say there is always a gap between what the survey indicates, but I think what is needed is to actually go beyond the survey to understand the pulse of the people through stories. So what really are we doing with stories? The moment we look at understanding the stories within the organizations, we are actually trying to understand what are the beliefs in the organization. What are the prevalent beliefs in the organization? What do people believe in? We're also trying to understand the mindset of people. Now, why is this required actually? So the moment we look at stories are not just about communication as such. I would say stories are like, they're windows to how people think, what people believe in, how do they interpret what is happening around them in the organization, how are they experiencing the role that they are playing, how do they view their work, the business, their people, how do they view the situations that they're dealing with. I think a lot of insights can actually be gathered from these stories. And one of the important things, especially here when it comes to stories within organizations, is to sort of understand what is the collective mindset within the organization. And I think that is the most critical part for leaders today to understand what is going on within the organization. Right, I think I've moved ahead. Okay. All right. So one of the gaps that I see out is you're talking about the CEO's all hands meetings and many other interactions that happen between leaders and the rest of the organization. While the leaders are talking about the business, about the problems, about change, a lot of the people are still trying to grapple with understanding what is the change happening, what they need to do to sort of rise up or even to deliver. They are looking for somebody to listen to the voice of, yeah, this is the story out here of my product. This is the story of how our process is actually limiting. This is a story of the tools that we use out here. This is a story of our customers' expectations. This is a story of how there are issues between teams and two teams internally are not aligned. Now that is where the CSO's role needs to be that of being the bridge. I wouldn't say a CSO is someone who is just the chief story officer, just trying to sort of pick up stories or propagate stories. I would say that's one of the key factors there to sense the stories within the organization. What are the stories which are not usually coming out in conversations, which require somebody to actually facilitate those and ease those conversations so the stories are being picked up? I think yesterday Soundari made a very wonderful point when she said, you need to sort of focus on the pauses in between, the silence in between, the pauses in between. And I think that's exactly what the CSO needs to do, is to sense the stories that are not being vocal, that are not being heard generally out. There are loud voices in the organization. There are voices which are usually quiet. How do you get these stories out to understand what really is going on in the organization and what really is the set of beliefs that are driving various individuals, the teams, as well as the organization? One of the other, I would say, responsibilities of a CSO is to sort of be the bridge to advance the narrative. What is the organizational narrative that needs to be advanced? Which will also sort of mean that there is a strategic direction which has been defined or set. Now, if that needs to be understood by the rest of the organization so that they can align better, they understand and align better with that strategic direction. They can move and they can increase their velocity. And how do you advance that narrative? How do you enable that understanding so that this is, again, I'm talking of a two-way street where the CSO is actually being the bridge to understand what is going on in terms of the ground realities, what are those stories out there of people, and surface them and move them up to leadership, and also understand what leadership is doing and take those narratives and also help translate that for the people. I think most of the times why we need this bridge is because if I am a CFO, I'm going to be in that meeting, I'm going to bring or take away what is the impact to the financial function of the organization. Or if I'm in marketing, I'm more focused or narrowed down in terms of my focus on the marketing function. Now, how do I sort of understand it from an organizational perspective is where a CEO probably can look at it, but in organizations, there is always a gap between what a CEO, how a CEO is looking at things and what's really happening with people, down the hierarchy. And I think that is where the CSO's role is to be that of the bridge. And I think we're, can we move back, Artem? Can we move to the previous slide, please?
Yes, your arrow keys on the keyboard, left and right.
I tried that. It doesn't seem to be working.
Oh, try the arrows above the presentation, lower upper left corner.
Oh, okay. Let me do that. All right. Okay.
Perfect.
So, all right. Thank you so much. So here's where the CSO needs to sort of approach this with a 4-story framework. The first one is called the story of systems. So when you say the story of systems, it is the CSO's responsibilities is to understand what is the larger story that the organization is part of. What are they actually trying to shape as an organization? And understanding that, that's a very strategic understanding. It's also to understand how the organization is playing a role in the ecosystem, in the industry also. I think that is very critical for a CSO's role. And I'll give an example that happened pretty recently. So the Prime Minister of India gave a call, given the kind of situation that we have with in terms of optimizing use of fuel and energy, and how to sort of tide over the situation, because there is disruption in supply chains across the globe. Now it so happened that, what does this mean to organizations? And there was also a call to say, hey, encourage your people to work from home wherever possible. Now, here is this, the CEO of a large organization called Zoho Corporation. His name is Sridhar Vembu, and he actually made a statement. I'm sure he had a communication within the organization, as well as he also made a statement, provided a statement on social media, actually in public, that as an organization, they have taken a call not to work from home as such, because it is imperative that people come to the office to work, especially the kind of business that they are in, and the kind of stage their business is in, the kind of functioning that the setup they have to operate today. I think that understanding of what is happening outside in the ecosystem, and what is the larger story, and how do you translate that, how does it impact the organization, understanding that is very critical, is what I feel. And that is where understanding the story of systems, what is happening outside in the ecosystem of the organization. The next thing is to sort of go inside the organization to understand the story of teams. What is the story that is aligning the different folks, different functions within the organization? How are they aligned to sort of achieve the organizational objectives? What are the key narratives? And here, that is where we are looking at how does a CSO advance the narrative? And for that, the CSO needs to sort of understand how do these teams function. And one of the common characteristics of teams, I see very few organizations where two teams are working in tandem. So most times there is usually some kind of a conflict that is usually existing. Some bit of conflict is healthy, but what are the stories when it comes to the interactions between different teams, different functions? And when the understanding of these stories or tuning into these stories happens, that is when the CSO is able to sort of gather what is really going on with these teams, what are the dominant stories, what are the dominant narratives, and what are the set of beliefs that as functions, as teams, different teams, that they are operating from. I think that those are two stories that a CSO needs to understand. The third one is the story of others. Now, it's not enough to look at teams. It's probably also important to sort of look at the third kind of story, is the story of others, which means to say I need to understand what is happening with each individual. And there are individuals who are driven, who are working to sort of advance the organizational objectives, who are aligned very well. There are people within the teams who are not really aligned. They need direction, they need help, they need to be understood, they have concerns about a variety of things. Now, how are those stories actually coming out? Now, I know functional managers have a role to play when it comes to sort of working with their teams and helping them align. But are functional managers able to sort of understand the power of story, able to listen to the story, or are they more focused on achieving the functional objectives? And that is where I think a CSO is probably playing is a neutral entity who can actually enable that equation with individuals, especially in organizations where there are specific individuals with whom you want to sort of understand what is the story happening out there, how do they think, what beliefs do they carry. And I think that is a very critical part of also making sure those voices are heard within organizations and within teams. The fourth one is actually very internal to the CSO, and this is called the story of self. So the story of self is more to do with the CSO himself or herself, or to understand what am I doing as a CSO, who am I as a CSO, why am I doing what I'm doing. I think those stories and are very important to understand to sort of make sure that the CSO is able to perform the role of the CSO. And those stories are the ones which define the, we all know that our past experiences are what define how we operate, how we think, how we behave, how we take decisions, how we look at the world. So here we are looking at the CSO itself is looking at what is the set of stories that are driving my view of the world, my perspectives, my beliefs, and the lens through which I am going to understand what is happening outside, when I interact with other people, when I listen to other people. What am I listening to and what am I not listening to? How am I interpreting? How am I attaching meaning to, different experiences or different events happening outside of me when I'm interacting one-on-one with teams. I think understanding my stories and the way I look at things, that awareness is going to be a critical part of a CSO's role. So we're looking at 4 stories here. Story of systems, which is the ecosystem outside the organization. Then you look at the story of teams, which is very much to do with the different teams within the organizations. These are different teams, different functions maybe. And then we are looking at the story of others, where we are going to understand what are these individual stories. Are we surfacing some critical stories from the organization, not just to sort of say these are success stories, but also to hear stories of failure, stories of courage, stories of limitation. I'll probably give an example of a simple thing, which is a story that surfaced during one of the programs that we were running in an organization. One of the leaders who had been working in the organization for about 9 years actually brought up this within in that story work that we were doing with them, and mentioned that I have a problem which I haven't spoken about to with anyone. I have been trying to sort of wake up early in the morning. I somehow cannot wake up early. I have tried variety of things. I can push myself to do it for a day, but I cannot wake up, earlier than what I'm waking up now at. And when I delved into that, it was a story of somebody trying to overcome something out there and how that is impacting work, and how the person is already rushing in the morning to get to work, and that is impacting the way they are going to operate and interact and deliver at the workplace. And being in a leading a team of people, the person says, look, I'm battling with this and I have not opened up about this with anyone. Now, a CSO is someone probably who should be able to sort of build that equation, is what I feel, to with individuals also, so that there is that level of psychological safety that comes where people are able to sort of voice their stories, and the CSO is also able to sort of surface those stories, sense those stories, and sort of make sure that the understanding is available in terms of what is going on, what could be the factors which are contributing to the performance or limitations within the teams, individuals, and organizations. I think that is where we're looking at this 4-story framework. Now, what does the CSO need to do to sort of, one is, yes, the 4-story framework is available, but what does the CSO need to do? How does the CSO need to think what should happen within the mind, or within, in terms of the capabilities of shaping the mindset of the CSO. The first thing I feel is I believe is narrative awareness. So when you look at what is narrative awareness, can I identify what are these narratives and what are stories outside? When somebody is having a conversation, communicating, there are discussions happening, even in meetings, can I spot stories? Can I spot what is going on there? And that ability is very critical for a CSO. The second thing is to sort of build their, or understand their identity. Who am I as an individual? What are my beliefs and values? So this is the CSO's internal world, where what beliefs do they come from? Now, if the CSO believes that, yes, I've heard this narrative around that, stories can, after a point, stories can become very monotonous. We are hearing the same stories from different people. It's like, yeah, customer had a problem and I solved this problem, and now the customer is happy. So, or we tried to do this and it was hugely challenging and we overcame this. Now, if I as a CSO is not able to bring out the value from those stories, or even to understand what those stories are mean to different people, my belief is that, yeah, these stories are all pretty similar, or this is a common story we keep hearing. I think that is very critical to understand, that the stories around, the way I look at people's stories, the way I think about stories, what do I believe about stories, what are the values that I am driving my approach to when it comes to interacting with others, when it comes to story of other team as well as the systems. I think that is where I feel the CSO needs to sort of understand what is the identity they're donning, what is the set of beliefs that are driving their approach to the CSO's role. The third thing is about thinking patterns. So as humans, we're a bundle of patterns, bundle of habits. We sort of don't have to think after a point. Things go on autopilot. The patterns emerging constantly. So how do I understand my own patterns, my own thinking patterns? Am I not listening to certain stories because I think, yeah, I know these people are always talking about this, or am I listening to specific set of stories or specific people, or am I already coming with a preset idea about individuals and teams? How am I thinking? What are the thinking patterns inside of me? I think that is very critical for a CSO to sort of shape his or her mindset. The fourth thing is the meaning making process. So what is the meaning? How do I attach meaning to certain things? What is the process that I have internally for myself? I think a lot of this comes with awareness and focusing on paying attention to what is happening inside the mind of the CSO. And how am I attaching meaning? What meaning do I give to events happening outside? What meaning do I give? How do I understand what are the events and stories being shared across the organization? How do I sort of attach meaning? What meaning do I attach to when it comes to changes happening outside and within the organization? And how do I understand what is the strategic change, and how do I translate it? So that meaning making is going to be a very critical part of, one is to understand myself, and that is also the way to understand the world outside. And the fifth one that I want to look at is congruence. I think a key element here is about being congruent. A CSO's role is not about just going and saying, okay, let me pick up stories from here, and we also spoke about, if it is picking up stories for either social media marketing or brand building, that becomes a very limited exercise. Here we are trying to understand or build a bridge between what is happening with leadership, what is happening at up in the hierarchy, and what is going on down there, and being the bridge. And that means to say, I need to understand what are the limitations and what are the barriers within the organization that I need to be sort of eased, so that, or need to be surfaced all the way up, so the right issues can be addressed. The problems that are there, which are choke points for the organization, can actually be identified. And for that, I, as a CSO, need to sort of approach from a state of congruence. My thought, word, and action, my intent needs to be aligned, because that dissonance, any dissonance there, will be easily identified by by people. It's very easily noticeable by people when my intent is not in alignment with what my actions are. And I think that congruence is, I would say, is one of the critical elements. Otherwise, it can be easily branded as you are the inside man who's just coming here to drive some agenda. So that, I think, is a very, very, I would say, very, critical play for the CSO to make sure that they are maintaining that congruence, they're maintaining their integrity, they're maintaining that ability to sort of come through and build the equation and the bridge with people. So I'd like to close by saying, to shape the story of the organization, I think the key is to start with shaping the story of the self. So CSO's role is not just about the stories outside first. I would say delve in, go inside to sort of examine what narratives are driving me, what narratives and stories in my own journey have shaped my beliefs, how do I look at the world, and now what do I need to do with the kind of stories that I have, and how do I make them work for me, how do I tune into the stories of others through the way I look at the world. And I think in the previous conversation there was, Mark made a wonderful statement. He said there are probably in the whole world there are 5 or 6 who can really fit into the role of a CSO. I think that's a very good number, is what I feel. And humans are great at modeling behavior. We learn everything by looking at people. Right from the time we are born, we look at people and we model everything. We model behavior, we learn things through modeling. Even on a job, the moment you go onto a job, if you're a newbie, you have a buddy or a mentor who you're going to sit with and shadow. So we model what is happening around. And I think if we have those 5, 6 people or a handful of people who are basically the right fit for a CSO, I feel understanding this, how they look at the world and how they approach the organizations in terms of their storytelling, the way they think inside, the stories inside and the stories outside, how do they sort of play that bridge? If we can delve into that, we'll be able to sort of shape that mindset of many more CSOs and storytellers within organizations and make them a success. Right. Thank you very much, and look for some questions. Back to you, Arkan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a great showcase of how understanding the system begins with understanding the self. Thank you. That was incredible. We have actually a couple of questions from Yulia and from Michelle in the chat. If you can, please stay after your talk and reply on those in text, because we need to move on. But I won't let you go before I ask you the traditional question. Yeah. So if there was only one way to apply story in organization, what would you choose and why?
Sorry, I missed your audio.
Yeah, let me come again. So if there was only one way to apply stories in organizations, or one task you could apply it for, what would you apply it for and why?
Oh yes, yeah, lovely question. I would apply that to shape mindset within the organization. I think stories have the power of enabling people's mindset, the way people think, and a lot of times we are seeing stories. Why do we use stories in communication? It is to convey our messages. Instead of facts, how do we use story as a vehicle to drive our key messages? And what are we trying to do there? We're trying to sort of persuade, we're trying to influence, we're trying to help somebody understand, we're trying to translate, we're enabling somebody to create meaning about what is happening. So about our ideas in our head, or about the way we look at things. Now, when you look at individuals, you probably can do that, but if it is at an organization level, how do you shape the organization's mindset? And I think is a biggest challenge today. And with a lot of change happening with artificial intelligence and disruption happening around, how do you shape that mindset? And there's a lot of talk of building resilience today and adaptability in organizations, in people. Now if we need to do that, that requires a change in the mindset of people. So I am an endurance athlete. So I play with the story inside of me of how do I build that resilience? How do I build that ability to, what's the story in my head or the narrative in my head when I have to sign up for a race, when I have to do something which is not comfortable for me, when I have to even entertain that idea? How do I bring about that change? I think where that is where shaping the mindset, I feel, is very critical today, as leaders, and especially when it comes to the harnessing the power of storytelling in organizations.
Lovely. It connects wonderfully with the thing that's called meta skills. So it's not about being able to tell a story, it's about understanding the story that's being told in your head. Lovely answer. Thank you so much, Vinod. All these fires are burning right now for you. Let's give Vinod some appreciation for his talk, and please stay with us to answer the questions if you can. And the schedule
Yes.
allows it. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Artem. This is wonderful always. You're doing a fabulous job getting us all together here. Thank you.
Thank you.